Most of what you have been told about managing sugar focuses on cutting treats, taking pills on time, and walking a little more. Yet if your numbers barely move and your stomach still protests, the hidden culprit may be closer than you think. The way you cook and eat rice can quietly drive your glucose up and irritate your gut, even on days when you do everything right. I want you to hear the hope in this same breath. A few quiet changes in preparation can turn that familiar bowl from a burden into real support. And I will start you with one gentle step you can try with your very next pot, so you can feel steadier after a single meal. I have watched this play out across many years, with thousands of meals and hundreds of checkups. When people adjust how rice is prepared, rather than only how much is served, they often notice calmer energy and fewer afternoon crashes. And that is not wishful thinking. Trusted research communities in the United States, including teams that publish with the National Institutes of Health and educators connected with leading universities, have shown that simple kitchen steps can change starch structure, slowing the rush of glucose and nourishing the friendly bacteria that protect the gut, a two-for-one that matters deeply as we age. The strength of starting here is practical and humane. It costs almost nothing. It respects culture and routine, and it works alongside your current plan instead of fighting it, which is exactly what most of my patients need to stick with change. There are limits, and I want to keep your trust by saying them out loud. Bodies respond differently. Kitchen tweaks do not replace your prescribed care, and we must handle cooled or saved rice with care so that safety is never a question. Even with those realities, this path is worth your attention. Because it gives you control you can hold in your hands, you change what happens in your pot, and you change what happens in your bloodstream without fear, and without giving up the foods that feel like home. If you carry guilt for loving rice, set it down for now. There is a middle path between restriction and surrender, and it begins with understanding how preparation changes the way your body meets that bowl. Stay with me, and I will guide you through the first simple shift you can make before the water even warms. I will show where it shines, where it helps less, and how to keep it safe, so you can finish dinner with steadier sugar and a quieter gut, and with the comfort of knowing you are working with your body rather than against it. You may think that avoiding sweets, taking your medicine on time, and forcing yourself to walk a little more should be enough to keep your numbers steady. Yet, for many people in their 60s and 70s, the truth is more discouraging. The glucose still climbs, the belly still feels swollen, and the wave of exhaustion still rolls over you as if none of your effort mattered. That sense of unfairness is not in your head. It is the result of missing a crucial piece that almost no one talks about: the way you prepare your food. Too often, the advice stops at what to eat and what to avoid. But the body does not just respond to ingredients, it responds to how those ingredients are treated in the kitchen. Rice is the perfect example. For many older adults, it is not just a grain, it is family, memory, and comfort. Yet it can also be the quiet reason your glucose spikes and your gut rebels. The strength of addressing this truth is that it allows you to hold on to what feels familiar while changing how it affects your body, which means you can honor your culture and your taste without sacrificing your health. The drawback of ignoring it is that you may keep circling through the same frustration, following instructions perfectly but still feeling drained and defeated, because the hidden factor of preparation was never adjusted. Research from respected institutions such as Johns Hopkins and Harvard makes this point clear, showing that the structure of starch shifts depending on methods of soaking, cooling, or pairing, and those shifts can decide whether your meal steadies you or sinks you. This knowledge can be uncomfortable at first because it means long-standing habits were part of the problem. But it is also deeply freeing because it means you have more power than you thought. I remind my patients again and again that the key is not always a brand new menu, but a wiser way of preparing the foods they already love. When you see that comfort food can become healing food, you begin to feel not just relief, but genuine hope. And hope is the energy that carries real change forward. What if I told you that rice itself is not the villain you have been taught to fear? The real turning point lies in how the starch inside that grain is unlocked by the choices you make at the stove. Starch is built like a coiled spring, and your body reacts very differently depending on whether that spring is allowed to loosen slowly or whether it is snapped wide open in an instant. When it snaps open, the sugar rushes into your blood. You feel the spike and then the crash, and your gut feels swollen and burdened as if it had to carry more than it could bear. When the spring loosens slowly, the glucose drips in at a manageable pace. Your energy feels steady, your digestion lighter, and your body can actually use the nutrients rather than fight them. The real power here is that you do not have to throw out the foods you love. You simply need to change the way they are treated before they reach your plate. That is an advantage many of my patients never imagined because they believed control required restriction. But the limitation is clear too. It demands consistency because skipping the method even a few times can bring back the same roller coaster of highs and lows. Strong evidence supports this. Teams from the Mayo Clinic and Harvard have shown that when rice is cooled and then gently reheated, it produces resistant starch, a form that behaves more like fiber than sugar, and that travels down to nourish the healthy bacteria in your gut instead of overwhelming your bloodstream. In other words, the very same grain can either act like a spike or like steady fuel depending on how you prepare it. Knowing this means you are no longer trapped between enjoyment and health. You can have both, and that is the kind of discovery that changes the way you see every meal. From this point forward, I want you to picture rice not as an enemy to fear, but as an ally waiting to be guided by your hand in the kitchen. I think often of a woman in her early 70s who sat across from me with tears in her eyes because every evening meal seemed to betray her. She had given up cakes, taken her medication faithfully, and walked laps around her neighborhood. Yet each morning her glucose was higher than the night before, and her belly felt heavy, as if the food had turned against her. She whispered that she was considering giving up rice altogether, and the thought alone made her feel as though she was cutting herself off from her own past. I told her to try something she had never considered, to soak the rice in cool water for half an hour before cooking. She chuckled at the suggestion because it sounded too easy, too ordinary to matter, but she promised she would try. When she returned a couple of weeks later, her face carried a new kind of light. She told me that her mornings felt calmer, her stomach less swollen, and her glucose readings more steady than they had been in years. What struck her most was that she had not lost the comfort of rice. She had simply changed its story in her kitchen. That is the real strength of this approach. It lets people act without feeling punished, while the drawback is that it calls for patience, because the body reveals its gratitude slowly, over days and weeks rather than overnight. Yet her results mirror what nutrition science already teaches us, that soaking softens the grain, reduces anti-nutrients that block minerals, and shifts the starch toward a form the body can handle with more grace. She had walked in ready to surrender, but by changing one humble step, she discovered that food could once again feel like a partner instead of an enemy, and that single change gave her hope strong enough to carry her forward. When I explain this first adjustment in detail, I always emphasize that it is not a complicated rule, but a gentle pause that can become part of the rhythm of your kitchen. I tell my patients to wash the rice softly until the water turns lighter, then to let it sit in cool water for about half an hour before they ever bring it to a boil. That short waiting time is not wasted. It begins to wash away phytic acid that blocks important minerals, and it softens the starch so that when the rice is cooked, it lands in the body more like a steady fuel than a sudden rush. The great strength of this approach is that it demands nothing beyond a little patience, no special equipment, no costly supplements, and it leaves the taste and comfort of the rice exactly as you know it. The drawback is only inconsistency, because if you skip the step in a hurry, you lose the very benefit you are hoping for. And it takes practice before it feels as natural as breathing. Still, science is clear that this method works. Studies have shown that soaking rice reduces anti-nutrients and improves the absorption of minerals like iron and zinc, nutrients that become more precious as we age. and as our digestion loses some of its efficiency. I like to remind people that food is not simply fuel, it is information, and the way you prepare it is the language your body listens to. By soaking, you are giving your body a calmer message, and over time that message can help smooth the sharp edges of fatigue and bloating. I know it may sound almost too easy, and I understand the doubt, yet once my patients give it a chance, many of them feel the difference in their own mornings. It is not about perfection, it is about repetition, and when this small act becomes routine, the benefit quietly builds into lasting stability. I do not want you to leave this lesson only with words in your head. I want you to feel the change in your own body, and that begins with a small act tonight. Before you cook, take the rice you plan to make. Wash it with care until the water looks clearer, and let it sit quietly in a bowl of cool water. This pause will cost you almost nothing, and it may reward you with more than you expect when you wake tomorrow. The strength of doing this right away is that you create living proof inside yourself, proof that is more powerful than any chart or lecture, because when you feel lighter and see your readings level out, you no longer need persuasion. The drawback is that the shift is gentle. It does not explode with dramatic results after a single meal. But if you repeat it through the week, you will begin to notice mornings that feel calmer and days that feel steadier. That is the gift of small consistency. I urge you not to postpone it, because every time you choose to try, you send your body a kinder message, and those messages add up to real control that belongs to you alone. I know how easy it is to believe that by the time you reach your 60s or 70s, the body is fixed in place, too tired or too damaged to respond to anything new. But what I have witnessed year after year tells a different story. The truth is that even the gentlest change, repeated with care, can send a wave of healing through your system. Something as simple as soaking rice before cooking, or cooling it before reheating, or adding a pinch of a supportive spice may look like nothing to the outside world, but inside the body, it is a message of relief and balance repeated, meal after meal. The great advantage of these small steps is that they do not ask you to abandon who you are or what you love. They simply build strength into the life you already live. The drawback is that they ask for patience, because the gains come quietly and can be overlooked if you are waiting for fireworks. But it is within the quiet that health is restored. Study after study has shown that steady, modest changes reduce the risk of diabetes, heart strain, and digestive discomfort. And I have seen those same changes give my patients back mornings that feel lighter and days that feel steadier. It is never too late to reclaim that kind of control. Never too late to soften the weariness that weighs you down. Never too late to discover that your future can feel freer than your past. Hope is not something handed to you from outside. It is something you grow with each choice you make. And that hope can begin right now with the way you prepare your very next meal. I would like to turn this moment over to you, because your voice and your story are as important as anything I can offer. Think back for a moment. Have you ever tried a small change in your kitchen? Perhaps soaking rice, choosing a gentler seasoning, or cooling leftovers before warming them again, and then noticed that your body responded with more ease the next day? If you have felt that shift, I invite you to share it here, because your experience could be the encouragement another person desperately needs. The real strength of opening up is that it creates a circle of support, a place where no one feels they are fighting these battles on their own. The drawback of staying quiet is that silence multiplies, and when we do not speak, we rob one another of the hope that our stories can give. So I ask you to add your words, to leave a comment about what has helped you or what you still find difficult, because your honesty might be the very spark that lights a path for someone else. When we come together in this way, each small voice adds weight, and the journey toward steadier sugar and calmer mornings becomes lighter for everyone who walks it. It may surprise you to hear that one of the most powerful tools I have found for softening the blow of rice on blood sugar is not subtraction, but addition. Instead of taking something away from your plate, you can add a quiet ally that has been in kitchens for centuries: vinegar. Inside vinegar lies acetic acid, and this compound changes the way your body handles starch. When rice is cooked with just a spoonful of vinegar in the water, the starch molecules interact differently with your digestive enzymes, and the glucose that would normally rush into your bloodstream is released more slowly and more gently. That shift can mean the difference between a sharp spike that leaves you drained and a steady curve that keeps you balanced. Researchers have documented this effect in controlled studies, showing that vinegar can reduce the glycemic impact of a meal by nearly 1/3, a number that may sound abstract until you realize that it can be the line between feeling exhausted after dinner and waking up with energy the next morning. The beauty of this approach is that it is accessible to anyone. A small bottle of apple cider vinegar or rice vinegar costs little, sits easily on your counter, and can be used without changing the meals you already know and love. The drawback is that it is not perfect for every stomach. Some people with reflux or sensitive digestion may notice discomfort if they use too much too quickly, which is why I always recommend beginning with half a spoon and letting the body guide the way. Over time, many of my patients have told me that this tiny adjustment brought visible results. They described glucose readings that stopped climbing so high and evenings that felt calmer, and they often laughed at themselves for ever doubting that something so ordinary could have real medical impact. The science behind it is convincing. Acetic acid does not only slow starch digestion, it also improves insulin sensitivity, which means the body uses the glucose that remains more effectively. This twofold benefit is what makes vinegar such a valuable partner, reducing the burden while strengthening the body's own ability to respond. To me, that is the essence of wise nutrition, not stripping away comfort but guiding it so that it nourishes rather than harms. With 1 spoonful of vinegar, you turn rice from a hidden enemy into a supportive friend, and that is a change anyone can begin today. There was a man named Jerry, 67 years old, who came to me carrying the heavy weight of frustration. His doctor had warned him that he was standing on the edge of diabetes. He had already given up cake, skipped sweetened drinks, and walked faithfully after dinner. Yet every check seemed to bring worse news. His glucose was climbing bit by bit, and he told me he felt as though he was marching towards stronger medication with no way to turn back. I suggested something that sounded almost silly to him at first: to pour a spoonful of vinegar into the water the next time he cooked his rice. He laughed and said it reminded him of folk remedies his grandmother whispered about. But in the same breath, he admitted he had nothing left to lose and would give it a try. 2 months later, Jerry returned with a different energy in his step. His numbers were not perfect, but they had steadied, no longer rising higher each week, and his evenings no longer ended in the same crushing fatigue. More than the readings, what he treasured most was the feeling of control, the realization that he could stand in his own kitchen and influence his health with a choice that cost almost nothing. He admitted that on days he forgot to add the vinegar, the old spikes returned, which only convinced him further that the change was real and not just luck. What happened in his body made sense to the science. The acetic acid slowed the breakdown of starch and helped his insulin work more efficiently. But what happened in his spirit was just as important. He no longer felt doomed. He walked in believing his fate was sealed, but walked out weeks later with proof that even at 67 years old, he still had the power to guide his health, and that sense of hope was as healing as any medicine. Whenever patients ask me exactly how to bring vinegar into their meals without discomfort, I tell them to treat it the way they would treat salt or a gentle spice, as a seasoning that enhances rather than as a medicine to dread. The practice is simple enough to fit into any kitchen. You rinse your rice as you normally would, and before you bring the pot to a boil, you add a single spoonful of apple cider vinegar or rice vinegar to the cooking water. If your stomach is delicate, or if you have had issues with reflux in the past, begin with half a spoon and give your body time to adjust before moving higher. The rice will cook just as tender as always. The taste will remain soft and familiar, and most people cannot even detect the difference. But inside your body, the acetic acid is working. It slows the enzymes that break starch into sugar, and it nudges your insulin to use the glucose more effectively. The beauty of this method is that you do not need to change your recipes or buy any costly products. You can fold it directly into the meals you already love. The drawback is that it must be practiced consistently to matter, and for those with more serious stomach conditions, it should be discussed with a physician before becoming routine. Clinical research backs this up, showing that vinegar added in even small amounts lowers the glycemic index of rice and produces smoother glucose readings after meals. What this means is that the very bowl that once spiked your sugar and left you exhausted can, with one quiet adjustment, become part of your healing routine. I often remind my patients that the kitchen can be as powerful as the pharmacy when it is used with knowledge, and vinegar is one of the most ordinary bottles sitting on the shelf, yet one of the most potent allies for health, if you know how to use it well. Over the years, I have learned that the foods we cherish most often need only a gentle partner to change the story they write inside our bodies. Rice has been at the center of countless tables, but when it is eaten alone, it can sometimes drive sugar too high and leave the heart exposed. That is why I began encouraging my patients to add a quiet ally, a small measure of oats stirred right into the pot. Oats carry a soluble fiber known as beta-glucan, a remarkable compound that slows the rush of glucose into the bloodstream and at the same time latches onto cholesterol in the digestive tract, helping the body send it out rather than letting it settle in the arteries. Research from respected universities has shown that blending even a modest portion of oats, about 5 to 7% of the mixture, can lower the sugar surge after a meal by nearly 43% and can reduce harmful LDL cholesterol as well. Those numbers are powerful, but what matters even more is how people feel when they make this shift. They describe calmer afternoons, lighter mornings, and the reassurance that they are protecting both blood and heart without losing the comfort of a warm bowl of rice. The beauty of this approach is that it delivers two benefits in one: steadying sugar and guarding the heart, all while keeping culture and taste intact. The drawback is that if you pour in too much, the rice can become dense or sticky, and some may resist the unfamiliar texture. So it is wise to begin gently and let the palate adapt. I remind everyone that health is not about stripping away pleasure, but about shaping it with wisdom. By welcoming oats into the pot, you are not giving up rice. You are giving rice a partner. And together they serve your body with far more kindness than either grain could offer alone. There is one woman I will never forget, Dorothy, 75 years old, who walked into my office with the kind of fatigue that only long struggle can carve into the face. Her cholesterol had been rising for years. Her blood sugar now hovered at the edge of diabetes, and she confessed that every new prescription or diet list felt like another chain wrapped around her life. She told me she dreaded the thought of giving up rice, because for her rice was not just food, it was memory and comfort, and the sound of family gathered at the table. I offered her a different path, not subtraction but addition, to stir a single spoonful of oats into the rice she was already cooking. She raised her eyebrows and smiled politely, clearly unconvinced, but she promised to try because it felt less like a punishment and more like an experiment. A month later, Dorothy returned with a different energy in her step. She said the rice tasted the same to her, soft and warm, but her mornings felt different, no longer heavy with sugar crashes. Her glucose numbers were steadier. Her doctor noted that her LDL cholesterol had begun to fall, and she told me she finally felt as if she had some control left in her own hands. The strength of her journey was that she discovered change could be woven into her routine without stripping away joy. The drawback was that she had to be consistent, and she admitted that when she skipped the oats, her sugar would climb again, a reminder that the body listens to what we do every day. The science behind her experience was clear. The beta-glucan in oats slowed the rush of glucose and bound cholesterol in the gut, easing the burden on her heart and her blood. But what mattered most was the transformation in her spirit, from a woman resigned to loss into a woman proud of the small but powerful choice she could make. Dorothy kept her rice, she kept her comfort, and she gained back hope, proof that even at 75 years old, it is never too late to guide your health with a gentle hand. I often remind my patients that sometimes the most powerful medicine is hiding in plain sight, and one of my favorite examples is turmeric, the golden spice that has sat in kitchens for generations. Inside that bright powder is curcumin, a compound that science has shown to be far more than a seasoning. Curcumin works like a key that helps insulin open the doors of your cells, allowing glucose to enter and be used rather than left to flood the blood. At the same time, it cools the silent fires of inflammation that age tends to kindle in joints, in arteries, and in the pancreas itself. And for those who struggle with digestion, turmeric stimulates bile flow, easing that heavy, sluggish feeling after a meal. The great advantage of using turmeric is its simplicity. A light sprinkle into the rice pot costs almost nothing, blends naturally with flavor, and supports sugar control, inflammation, and digestion all at once. Yet, there are limits. Curcumin on its own is not absorbed easily, which means the body lets much of it pass through unused unless it is paired with a small amount of fat or a pinch of black pepper. And if taken in excess, it can sometimes irritate the stomach rather than help it. Still, the science is striking. Clinical research, including work supported by the National Institutes of Health, has shown that curcumin lowers blood glucose and reduces inflammatory markers in ways that echo the action of certain diabetes medications. When I share this with my patients, I see the same expression again and again, the surprise that something so familiar could be so potent. I remind them that turmeric is not meant to replace their medicine, but to walk alongside it, a humble ally that adds color to the plate and quiet support to the body. By welcoming turmeric into the daily meal, you are choosing not just flavor, but also a science-backed partner for steadier sugar, calmer inflammation, and easier digestion. Proof that healing sometimes begins with the simplest of gestures. I think often of Helen, a woman of 69 who walked into my office with a frown that spoke louder than her words. She told me she hated pills, that each new prescription felt like a chain tightening around her life, and she dreaded the idea of swallowing medicine after medicine for the rest of her days. She asked me if there was anything she could do that felt more natural, something she could manage in her own kitchen. I suggested an experiment so small it almost seemed laughable, to sprinkle a pinch of turmeric into the rice she cooked each day. Helen raised her eyebrows, certain it would make no difference, but she agreed to try because it cost nothing and carried no risk. When she returned 3 months later, her entire presence had changed. She carried herself lighter, her smile came quicker, and her numbers told a story her doubt could not deny. Her blood sugar had steadied, her digestion felt calmer, and her physician had even reduced the dose of one of her medicines. The great advantage of this approach for her was not only the measurable improvement, but the sense of freedom, the feeling that she could take action without waiting passively for another prescription. The drawback was that turmeric was not a magic cure. She still needed her medicines, and she learned that the benefit only held if she used it consistently, day after day. Science explained what her experience showed. Curcumin and turmeric improved the sensitivity of her insulin, calmed the chronic inflammation that had been burdening her system, and gave her body a chance to handle glucose with less strain. But the most remarkable change was in her spirit. Helen no longer saw herself as a victim of disease, but as an active partner in her healing. That sense of hope, sparked by a golden spice from her own kitchen, proved to be as important as any prescription she had ever been given. Over the years, I have learned that rice can change its very nature depending on how it is treated after cooking, and this discovery has been one of the most eye-opening for my patients. When rice is left to cool and then gently reheated, the starch molecules rearrange themselves into a structure known as resistant starch. Unlike regular starch, which is quickly broken down into glucose in the small intestine, resistant starch resists digestion and travels deeper into the gut. There it serves as fuel for the beneficial bacteria that line the colon, bacteria that not only help with digestion, but also strengthen the immune system and reduce chronic inflammation. The result is a rare double gift: steadier blood sugar because less glucose rushes into the bloodstream, and stronger defenses because the microbiome is better fed. The beauty of this method is its simplicity. It requires no new food, no cost, and no exotic supplement, just the patience to let rice rest and then warm it again. The drawback is that the texture may seem slightly different when reheated, and more importantly, food safety must always come first. Rice must be cooled promptly, stored safely in the refrigerator, and reheated thoroughly to prevent harmful bacteria from growing. Modern research has confirmed what this practice delivers. Studies supported by institutions such as the Mayo Clinic and Harvard have shown that resistant starch improves insulin sensitivity, lowers after-meal glucose, and nurtures a healthier gut environment. I often tell my patients that this small act turns leftovers into medicine. At first, they may look doubtful, wondering if something so ordinary could matter. But when they try it, they often come back describing calmer mornings, fewer digestive complaints, and a sense of surprise that the food they already love could become even more supportive. For me, that is the heart of teaching nutrition, showing that with a single mindful step, you can change not just what you eat, but how your body experiences it. One of the most surprising lessons I share with my patients is that rice can behave like two completely different foods depending on how you treat it after cooking. When you eat it hot and fresh, the starch is loose and easily broken down, which means the glucose floods into your bloodstream quickly. But when you let that same rice cool, the starch molecules rearrange themselves into a tighter structure called resistant starch. This form resists digestion in the small intestine, so instead of turning rapidly into sugar, it travels down into the large intestine where it acts more like fiber. There, it feeds the friendly bacteria that line your gut, bacteria that in turn produce compounds which calm inflammation, strengthen your immune system, and improve how your body uses glucose. The beauty of this shift is that the very same bowl of rice that once spiked your sugar now supports both your blood and your gut. The strength of this method is clear. It costs nothing, it requires no special ingredient, and it provides a double benefit: smoother glucose and stronger microbiome health. The drawback is that it does call for care. Cooled rice must be stored safely in the refrigerator and reheated thoroughly before eating to avoid harmful bacteria. And for those with sensitive digestion resistant, starch can sometimes cause extra gas until the body adapts. Yet these are small concerns compared to the power it delivers. Research published in journals such as the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition has shown that the glycemic response of cooled and reheated rice is markedly lower than freshly cooked rice. That means you can keep the comfort of rice while turning it into something your body welcomes instead of fears. For me, this is a perfect example of how knowledge turns a simple kitchen habit into a tool of healing, proof that control over health often begins with the smallest, quietest choices we make. There was a man named Donald, 74 years old, who sat across from me with the heavy look of someone who had surrendered a part of himself. He told me he had stopped eating rice months earlier because each bowl left him bloated, uncomfortable, and facing blood sugar numbers that frightened him. He said it felt as if he had been forced to turn his back on decades of family tradition, and the loss weighed on him more than he cared to admit. I suggested something that sounded almost too simple: to cook his rice as always, but then to let it cool, keep it in the refrigerator, and reheat it before eating. Donald chuckled at the idea, saying he doubted cold rice could solve what medicine had not, but he agreed because he missed the comfort too much to refuse. A few weeks later, he returned with a different light in his eyes. He told me he was eating rice again, not every day but often enough to feel like himself, and the bloating that once left him miserable had eased. His glucose readings were steadier, his evenings calmer, and for the first time in years he felt as though food was working with him instead of against him. The advantage of this change was profound. It gave him back a beloved staple while also protecting his health, and it cost him nothing but patience. The drawback was that he had to handle the rice with care, refrigerating it quickly and reheating it thoroughly, and he admitted that in the beginning, his gut produced extra gas until his system adjusted to the resistant starch. The science made sense of his experience because when rice cools and is later reheated, its starch becomes resistant, passing through the small intestine without spiking glucose and arriving in the colon, where it feeds the beneficial bacteria that guard both digestion and immunity. Donald's journey taught me once again that health is not about exile from the foods we love, but about finding new ways to prepare them so that they become allies. In his smile, I saw proof that even at 74 years old, renewal is possible, and that a small shift in the kitchen can restore both tradition and hope. As I look back over these 5 quiet but transformative changes, I see a story that has repeated itself in so many of my patients. It begins with fear and frustration, the belief that rice must be abandoned in order to stay alive, and it ends with hope, the discovery that with a few thoughtful adjustments, the very food once seen as the enemy can become an ally. By soaking the grain to ease digestion, by adding vinegar to slow the rush of sugar, by folding in oats to steady both blood and heart, by sprinkling turmeric to calm inflammation, and by letting rice cool before reheating to create resistant starch, we have turned a familiar staple into a partner in healing. The great strength of these methods is that they ask for little more than attention and patience. They cost almost nothing. They respect the traditions of the table, and they can be repeated day after day with confidence. The drawback is that they are not magic. They require consistency, and they do not take the place of your prescribed care, but what they give in return is priceless. The sense that you still hold power in your own hands. What matters most is not only the numbers on a chart, but the change in spirit, the moment when you realize that health is not about exile from comfort, but about guiding comfort in a wiser way. And I want you to know this journey does not end here. In our very next step together, I will show you 6 kinds of rice that science has found to be especially kind to blood sugar. Grains that can expand your choices and your confidence at the same time. Until then, I invite you to share your story, to add your voice to this circle, because every word of experience becomes a light for someone else who still feels lost in the dark. Together, we can make the table not a place of fear, but a place of strength, tradition, and renewed hope.